Hello everyone and welcome to StudyIQ English. I am Joycey Joy. In this video, we will be discussing about derivatives, which are a kind of market instruments or a financial instruments. Let us understand what is the meaning of derivatives and what are the different types of derivative instruments. Now, to begin with the definition of derivatives, when you hear the term derivative, the word that comes to your mind usually is derive. So what does it mean? Derive means you extract something from something, right? Same way, derivatives also means that those financial instruments or those financial assets who derive their value from the underlying asset. There would be an underlying asset and this financial instrument would be based on this underlying asset, which means that the financial instrument's value is dependent upon the underlying asset. That is the meaning of the term derivative. So derivative means derives its value from an underlying asset. A derivative is a contract between two parties whose value or the price is derived from an underlying asset. So what is a derivative? It is a contract between two parties. It's a contract where the value or the price is derived from an underlying asset. Now, futures, options, forwards and swaps are the most common type of derivatives. These are the most common examples or the types of derivatives which we will be discussing. Initially, an underlying corpus is created which can consist of a single security or a combination of securities. So, initially an underlying corpus is created and this consists of single security or a combination. It can be of one security or a combination of securities. The value of the underlying asset is bound to change because the value of underlying asset is constantly changing. Now, see, derivatives are hugely or highly vulnerable to change in the value. That is, it is highly volatile in nature. For instance, any derivative based on gold would fluctuate based on the change in prices accordingly. The derivatives change in price proportional to the underlying asset. That is, any derivative which is based on gold, it would fluctuate based on the change in prices. Now, suppose we have seen that the value of the derivative is decided based on the value of underlying asset. For example, if the underlying asset is gold, now we know that the price of gold is fluctuating. So as the price changes or as the price of gold fluctuates, what will happen? The value of the derivatives also will change. It is proportional to the underlying asset. That's why we say that derivatives are highly vulnerable to price changes or highly fluctuating in nature. These are the types of derivatives. The first one is forwards. It is a customized contract. So forwards are customized contract. What is meant by customized? Which means that the terms and conditions may change from each contract to other. There is no uniform standard and the terms and conditions can change from one contract to other depending on the parties entering into the contract. It is a customized contract between two parties to buy or sell an asset, product or commodity at a predetermined price at a later date. So it's a contract between two parties to either buy or sell an asset, a product or a commodity at a predetermined price at a later date. Now, here two parties A and B enters into a contract. Now, what is the contract? It would be to buy or sell a commodity. Maybe A can be the seller or the buyer or the other way. It can be an asset, a commodity or a product. Now, the thing is that the price at which the purchase and sale would take place, it would be predetermined. That is, it would be at a predetermined price and for a predetermined day. That is on a later date. Forwards are not traded on central exchanges, but it is held over the counter. So that's why it is called OTC. OTC is over the counter, which means that they are not traded on a stock exchange but over the counter. It is most useful for hedging and risk reduction, even though it does not guarantee any kind of profit. So what is the advantage for the forwards? The advantage of forwards contract is that it is useful for hedging as well as for risk reduction. Over-the-counter forwards are also subject to counterparty risk. This is the disadvantage or the risk associated with it. That is, it is subject to counterparty risk. Counterparty risk is a type of credit risk in which the buyer or the seller may be unable to meet his or her obligations. So, what is counterparty risk? Counterparty risk means it's a credit risk. Now, what is a credit risk? Either the buyer or the seller. So, it can be either the buyer or the seller. Any one party is not able to meet the obligation. That is counterparty risk. One party, counterparty, the other party. Counterparty means the other party. One party is not able to meet the obligation. What would be the obligation? To buy or sell. If the buyer or the seller becomes insolvent and is unable to fulfill his end of bargain, the other party may be out of options to save his position. Next is futures contract. It's a financial contract which is similar to forward, which means that there is a agreement between the buyer and the seller to buy a commodity and sell a commodity at a predetermined price on a predetermined date. But the only difference is that futures are traded on stock exchange, whereas forwards are done over the counter. So the only difference is that they are traded on exchanges and therefore they are standardized and regulated. Who regulates the futures? SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India. Why? Because they are traded on a stock exchange. That's why it is regulated by SEBI. So these are standardized and regulated. There would be a standard because they are traded on a stock exchange. Other than that, all other things are very similar to forward contracts. It is agreement between two parties and the date is predetermined and also the price is predetermined. In December 2021, future trading in 7 agricultural commodities has been outlawed by Securities and Exchange Board of India. Soybean, crude oil, crude palm oil, wheat, rice, chickpea, green gram, rapeseed and mustard are the commodities that are restricted in futures trading. This is very important. Which are the commodities that are restricted? These are restricted by SEBI. These commodities could not be traded on a stock exchange. Next is options. Option contracts are financial contracts in which the buyer or the seller has the right but not obligation to buy or sell a commodity. From the name option itself, we get a clue that it provides some kind of option. An additional option is given. This additional option may be applicable to either the seller or the buyer. So, options contract provides an additional option. So, this may be for the buyer or for the seller. Any one party has an additional option. Options are similar to futures that they are contract and or agreement between two parties at a predetermined rate in the future. Now, how they are similar to futures? They are similar to futures because they are traded on a stock exchange. They are similar to futures because they are traded on a stock exchange. The parties are under no legal obligation to keep their end of bargain, which means that they may or may not decide to sell or buy the security on the time. That is why it is called option. Either a buyer or the seller gets an option to withdraw from the contract before the date. That's why it is called option. Now, swaps. Now, swap literally means exchange. So, swap means exchange. You are swapping something means you are exchanging something. So, they are financial derivative which are used to exchange one type of cash flow for another. So, these are financial instruments which are used to exchange one type of cash flow with some other kind of cash flow. Private agreements between parties that are mostly traded over the counter and not traded on exchanges. So, these are private agreements and they are done over the counter and not exchange. These are private agreements between two parties, between two private parties, and therefore they are not traded on stock exchanges. Currency swaps and interest rate swaps are the most common types of swaps. So there are two common types of swaps. One is currency swaps and second one is interest rate swaps. One is currency swap. You can exchange one currency for another. Another one is interest rate swap. Interest rate swap, for example, can be used by the trader to convert a variable interest loan to a fixed interest loan. Like for example, if a borrower wants to convert his loan into a fixed interest loan, that is for a fixed rate of interest from floating rate, they can do that. So that is swap. So swap means exchanging. Now coming to the advantages and disadvantages of derivatives. First one, as we have said, it helps in hedging risk. It reduces the risk in one's investment because derivatives give more options. And they are used as insurance policies to reduce the risk. Second one is its low transaction cost as compared to other financial instruments like the stock, bond, etc. The cost of transaction is less. They are also act as a risk management tool. Next, the disadvantage is that there is risk associated with the value of the underlying asset. As we have already seen, the value of the underlying asset may change anytime. So there is a risk associated with it. And the prices of the underlying assets may fluctuate, or there is high possibility of fluctuation, like the stock, bonds, etc. may fluctuate, and they are speculative in nature. Derivatives are common tool for profit making speculation as well. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of derivatives, and that's it about the derivatives market. I hope this was a useful one. Thank you so much for watching. I wish you all the very best.